Welcome to the 7 p.m. It's in the Book Literature Study Meeting. My name's Matt, and I'm an alcoholic.
Hey, Matt.
Please join me in a moment of silent meditation to reflect on why we are here, followed by the Serenity Prayer. And it's my pleasure and honor to introduce Meredith, our redoubtable discussion leader. Take it away, Meredith.
Thanks, Matt. Hey, everybody. My name is Meredith. I'm an alcoholic. Pretty good crowd for Sunday night. All right, we're studying the text of Alcoholics Anonymous, and the primary purpose that I was given to study was to diagnose myself. And so that's kind of how we conduct this meeting. We try to interpret what it says and see if we line up with this. The title page, it says Alcoholics Anonymous offers the first promise in this book. There are promises throughout. And the first promise says the story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism, recovered past tense, alcoholism, the obsession of the mind, which compels us to drink, and the allergy of the body that condemns us to go mad or die. And that was quoted by Bill Wilson from AA Comes of Age. We get into the preface, which reminds us this is a text, and a text is something we study and put into practice. Okay, and then it also says the first portion outlines the recovery program, and a program is a procedure under which action is taken toward a goal, or a process by which action is taken toward a goal. So when I first came into AA, I came into the fellowship. I did not go anywhere near the steps. Some people are in recovery programs or sober living. That is not the AA program. You got to do that once you get here. All right, that's what is gives us the relief from the alcoholism. Forward to the first edition says, we of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. So we already learned we're recovered, and now it tells us what we recovered from. But the reverse indicates we are mentally and bodily sick. And that's pretty thick. All right? And a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body, because if it were really hopeless, we'd have an empty room. All right? And then it goes on to say, to show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. So it's a how-to, and it's to show. And I was taught to learn from what my sponsor did and then show others what I learned from my sponsor. And I like, too, where it says, really no other proof is needed to start. We don't need to confuse it with a lot of other books. I was inclined to get a lot of books on different, self-help and all that. And as far as you can never finished one, by the way. And then my sponsor, we just need the basic text for right now. Let's just get through that. And I like how it winds up that first paragraph by saying, many do not comprehend that the alcoholic is a very sick person. And I was the first of the many. I had to understand just how sick I was. And reading this book and underlining it and finding myself in these pages convinced me. All right. The forward to the second edition talks about how the fellowship grew in the first 16 years. Okay. And they talk about this wholesale miracle that has taken place in that first paragraph. Wholesale means widespread, extensive, and sweeping. So it was very quick to catch on because it worked. All right. And in the page XVI, Bill had worked with many alcoholics, but only he stayed sober because he was putting the spiritual remedy in front of the alcoholic problem when he was trying to share it. And really, we need to identify with the alcoholic problem. Most of us aren't going to come in here saying, I'm alcoholic, I better find God right away. It's just not how it goes for most of us. So the Dr. Silkworth said, present the grave nature of alcoholism first. And he did that with Dr. Bob. And it proved the theory that Bill had that only an alcoholic could help an alcoholic, as no other non-alcoholic could. And on the top of XVII, it also indicated that strenuous work, one alcoholic with another, was vital to permanent recovery. And then we get into the forward to the third edition, and the theme really of the third edition is the 12 steps are the 12 steps are the 12 steps. And that's the core of this process. Whether it's in Spanish or French or wherever you go. I went to a meeting in Italian, didn't understand anything, but I knew they were talking about the 8th step because they had a book. They're all passing out the 12 and 12. And my sponsor told me to share it every meeting. I just shared when it was my turn, and all right. But it talks about the principles of the program are the same for everywhere we go. And it also says they're summarized in these steps. It says in the 43rd edition, they're summarized. that the extensive steps are outlined in the first 77 pages or something, and then it goes on to what's like afterwards. And the fourth edition really underscores how this has grown because the book has been present. Where the book is present, AA grows. And it's the integrity of that message that we find in this book that helps it grow. If you are lucky enough to find the study that keeps your attention, you will find that this speaks to you. And for me, it gave me a lot of hope and a lot of encouragement. I felt really good after book studies. So, and it talks about that a lot. And then it talks about the literature will maintain the integrity of the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. We may hear various opinions here. We all have one. We all have different experiences. But the message of Alcoholics Anonymous is most succinctly and truthfully and completely expressed in these pages. All right? And now we're in the doctor's opinion. And as I reviewed last week, the doctor's opinion, an opinion is the formal expression of a professional judgment by an expert. And this doctor was Dr. William D. Silkworth. He treated 50,000 or so alcoholics. Some of those might have been retreads. It might have been more like 35,000. We know Bill was there 4 times. There was some repeat business, certainly. But it kept underscoring what he developed, which was this theory that we have a physical reaction to alcohol that sets us apart from other people and doesn't affect everybody. Just like allergies to strawberries. Not everybody has that. Allergies to cats. Not everybody has that. And I have to tell you, that was an eye-opener for me. He calls it an allergy. He says it's manifested when there's a presence of alcohol. And I just really believe when I drank, when anybody drank, they got the same great feeling I did. They were just better at controlling how much they drank. And that was not the case. So that was very helpful for me to see that I am physically somehow different. And then he talks about we work out our solution. A solution, our remedy to our problem is based in 2 areas. It's a spiritual reliance on a higher power and selfless action. And both of those were daunting because that's not a path I'd walked. So I had to kind of come in and listen to other people and see the results and be willing to follow along. It talks about, I love XI because it outlines the physical craving on the top of the page. It talks about how just frothy emotional appeal doesn't suffice because the message has to hold depth and weight.
You're skipping it.
I'm skipping ahead?
I think so, yeah. I think we start reading.
Thank you. We do. That's why there's 2 of us up here. We're starting on XXVII. The doctor's going to... Right. So we work out our solution on this altruistic plane, and then it says he should be sober before we approach him so he has a better chance of understanding and accepting what we have to offer. There's a lot of conjunctive phrases in the book that I love. Understanding and accepting. So I look for those as I read this book. And then the doctor is going to write more stuff.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah. So there was more than one doctor's opinion. So this is the second one, and I'll start reading now. So the subject presented in this book seems to me to be of paramount importance to those afflicted with alcoholic addiction. I say this after many years' experience as medical director of one of the oldest hospitals in the country, treating alcoholic and drug addiction. There was, therefore, a sense of real satisfaction when I was asked to contribute a few words on a subject which is covered in such masterly detail in these pages. We doctors have realized for a long time that some form of moral psychology was of urgent importance to alcoholics, but its application presented difficulties beyond our conception. What with our ultra-modern standards, our scientific approach to everything, we were perhaps not well equipped to apply the powers of good that lie outside our synthetic knowledge.
Okay, so the subject here is recovery from alcoholism. And then it says, what's presented in this book seems to be of paramount, utmost importance to those afflicted with alcoholic addiction. And affliction is to be troubled by bodily or mental pain. And in this case, it's both. We have bodily and mental pain. So affliction is a real thing. And we learn here, hopefully, that we're powerless over that we can't shake it off by ourselves. And then he actually says that the subject is covered in masterly detail, even though the most sobriety from the authors at this time was about 3 years. And yet he's saying, you can rely on what they're saying. And then he talks about the doctors realize we need moral psychology. Now, I try to define moral psychology by looking up the word moral and psychology. it's not exactly what they're talking about. If you look at page 569, it's talked a little bit about in the medical view of AA, which we read a few weeks ago. But how do you say it? Tebow?
Tebow.
Harry Tebow, the last paragraph on page 569, he was the one that really came up with this idea of moral psychology as it relates to alcoholism. And what he calls it is the moral psychology is 2 steps. We got to get them to, we got to somehow knock down that alcoholic ego. Because as sick as we are, we still insist that we can do it our own way over and over again to assert our will. So he says part of what the psychiatrist's job would be is to reduce the ego, get them to see it, and then also to accept any sort of outside help. Except that's if we're lucky enough if someone offers it. I came into AA for months. Nobody offered any help to me. I listened, but nobody approached me. Maybe because I was sitting there like this, like, don't come near me. I don't know. But I mean, it's helpful if people recognize that we, might need to be encouraged a little bit. So deflate the alcoholic ego and then help give them an effective mental defense. And they say here, the application presented difficulties beyond our conception. They didn't know how to give us this effective mental defense. They might have had some success with you need to go for help, just like, Roland Hazard. Jung convinced him to go to a religious society and he ended up in the Oxford groups. But this part about how does he get an effective mental defense, Jung couldn't even produce that in him. And so that's where they say this is outside our synthetic knowledge. This is really beyond what we can do. All right? They say they're not equipped, which is a pretty humble statement coming from.
Many years ago, one of the leading contributors to this book came under our care in this hospital, and while here, he acquired some ideas which he put into practical application at once. Later, he requested the privilege of being allowed to tell his story to other patients here, and with some misgiving, we consented. The cases we have followed through have been most interesting. In fact, many of them are amazing. The unselfishness of these men, as we have come to know them, the entire absence of profit motive, community spirit is indeed inspiring to one who has labored long and wearily in the alcoholic field. They believe in themselves, and still more in the power which pulls chronic alcoholics back from the gates of death.
Okay, so interestingly, they're talking about Bill W., right? He acquired some ideas. They were from the Oxford groups transmitted by Ebby. Those are listed on page 263. There are 6 of them. And that was what the Oxford groupers were using to have this spiritual experience or spiritual awakening. And that's what they gave Ebby, and it seemed to produce a change in him. He was 2 months sober when he visited Bill. And then Bill, after he went through this, he requested the privilege of being allowed to tell his story. And that's what we do here when we share. We tell our story. We talk about what it was like and what happened to us. And hopefully what happened is how we engaged in this step process and then what we are like today. And so he's saying we followed those cases and found it interesting. And now looking again, this book will repeat many times things that are important concepts. Right opposite to the other page, it talks about the men are unselfish. All right. So already they're talking about this unselfish movement. And then they talk about they believe in themselves and still more in the power, capital P. Now they're talking about the spiritual dependence. So it's 1 page later, they're saying again, this is about altruism and connection with a higher power. Right? And they don't necessarily come at the same time. But it's about, like it says here, Bill put them into practice. Okay? And he said he put them into practice at once. I got a sponsor who said, I want you to go early and say hello to people and remember their names, and I can barely look up. And she said, I want to hear 2 women's names after the meeting. I'm like, oh, boy, can you remember that? So I was doing things before I even believed they would do me any good or that I even felt like I had the courage to do them. Okay.
Of course, an alcoholic ought to be freed from his physical craving for liquor, and this often requires a definite hospital procedure before psychological measures can be of maximum benefit. We believe, and so suggested a few years ago, that the action of alcohol on these chronic alcoholics is a manifestation of an allergy, that the phenomenon of craving is limited to this class and never occurs in the average temperate drinker. These allergic types can never safely use alcohol in any form at all, and once having formed the habit and found they cannot break it, Once having lost their self-confidence, their reliance upon things human, their problems pile up on them and become astonishingly difficult to solve. Frothy emotional appeal seldom suffices. The message which can interest and hold these alcoholic people must have depth and weight. In nearly all cases, their ideals must be grounded in a power greater than themselves if they are to recreate their lives.
Okay. To get something straight about the craving, in Alcoholics Anonymous, the physical craving occurs once we drink. In drug programs, the craving is more of an obsession nature. And that can be confusing to people. But just so you know, in Alcoholics Anonymous, and this is an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, we don't crave alcohol after we've been detoxed. Now, if you've had a real serious bout of it, it might take more than 3 days for like most people. But once the alcohol has been removed and we've sort of recovered physically, now it's a matter of how do I keep the idea from coming back and driving me back to drink even when I don't want to. All right, because that's why I'm here. I kept drinking beyond when I didn't want to. All right, and then once I drink, then the craving takes over. That's going to decide how much and how long. All right, and so it says. This is an allergy, and it says it never occurs in the average temperate drinker. It sets us apart. Okay, and that's important to remember. And I love how it says we can't safely use it in any form. And once we form the habit, certain things happen to us. We lose our reliance on ourselves. We become less confident in ourselves. We find that things overwhelm us more. How many times do you say to you know, on a given day, I'm really overwhelmed? And what I do with the people I work with, I say, write down what's overwhelming you. And it all of a sudden shrinks down to like 2 or 3 things. And then they're manageable because we're so used to just the fear of the unmanageability kind of takes over and things are bigger than they really are. Now, there might be some big things, but then it comes down to when can we do something about them? So it's really about, can I prioritize these things so I can get through today? But I always think about this. Problems pile up on them and become astonishingly difficult to solve. And that's where I think about remorse, being overwhelmed, guilt. Before we know it, we're almost paralyzed.
Unmanageability.
Yes, unmanageability. And then it talks about how the frothy emotional appeal seldom suffices. I was an honor student in school. I had a lot going for me. And my mother would say, you have a lot going for you. If you just not drink, things would be better. And I'm thinking, I know that. I spend all week long trying to overcome the nonsense I do on the weekends. It gives me this bad reputation, but I can't seem to stop it. And knowing these things about myself actually makes me feel worse about the way I'm drinking. Yeah, I'm bright, I'm gifted, and I'm still wrecking my life. Right? It's almost like, why am I doing it? So when they say, if you just try harder, that's why the message that can interest and hold us has to have depth and weight, because we already know there's something way wrong. But we can't put our finger on it. And so we don't want to share it with somebody else either. So that's why I love how an interest and hold, there's another conjunctive phrase. I need to be interested, but I need to be held. So it's important to stay and keep coming and drinking from the fountain as much as you can of the truth about what we suffer and the solution therein so that you can be held. Gentle faced. And that's why it has had depth and weight, because my alcoholism is deep and weighty. I'm not sharing that with people. I'm not driving into that bar on a crappy Sunday night, wishing I didn't have to drive into that crappy bar, walk in and say, oh man, the obsession was just a bitch today. I just had to get here so I can drink because I hate myself in my life. Does it? It's all lies. Because I don't even understand it anymore. They use words like baffling in this book, and I love that. And then it says, in nearly all cases, that's most of us,